One could be forgiven for thinking that Cork is about to take flight and seize the moment. It is, after all, the fastest growing city in Ireland. And yet, its growth is driven by necessity. It's expanding because it has no choice, not because of any grand vision that might catapult it into a bohemian renaissance. Blessed by its undulating topography and perched on the mouth of Europe's largest natural harbour, Cork has the potential to become a vibrant destination of real scale. But to realise that potential, fundamental changes are needed. So let's put Cork under the microscope and ask questions about our city, our country, and our future. There's not enough green space in Cork City. Now, we do have the new Marina Park and there's Fitzgerald's Park, but they're also 20 minutes outside the city. How could we solve this conundrum? The city could purchase this space and turn it into a park. The proposed event centre is also right there. So when you have thousands of people spilling out onto South Main Street, it just doesn't have the capacity to hold that many people. Now, if the city purchased this, they could turn it into a green space, but also a plaza. And if you're thinking to yourself, that's not the city's remit, actually it is. And there's precedent too, because in the 1980s, for Cork's 800th anniversary, the council purchased Tuckey Street Car Park. They turned that into Bishop Lucy Park. So we're taking the same idea that 40 years ago they were able to implement, and we're saying, well, now we could do it again today. So by buying these sites and turning them into public spaces, we fix one of the most pertinent problems of the city. Now there's another one. This site is where the old tax office used to be. And it was actually Councillor Dan Boyle who suggested this. It would be great if the city purchased this site and turned it into a park as well. Imagine if they did both of those, right? BAM, we're going to build a hotel there. Oh, you know BAM. Oh, sure, I think you've heard of BAM, the Children's Hospital, the event centre. Yes, that BAM, the same BAM. Their planning permission expired, I think, just within the last 12 months. Now, is the city going to swoop in and do something radical here? Nah, probably not. It doesn't really have the drive, and from everything I've seen, there doesn't seem to be any ambition to pull off projects like this. And the problem is, it's one thing for councillors to say, we need more green spaces in the city centre, but then actually going to do something about it is different. You know, I can tell someone I love them, but then the act of making love is seemingly quite different. There's another space in the medieval part of the city, and it's next to Elizabeth Fort. With a bit of imagination, that can become a public space, again used for music, art, food, or community events. The city would pay the guy who runs the whole place so that he can relocate his business nearby and still have plenty of money left over, right? So everybody wins by exposing the old fort wall. The city gets a beautiful space. It reconnects with some of its medieval heritage. The guy gets to continue his business. If you're kind of shocked by these first two suggestions, that the city would go and create parks and that the city would go and create plazas, and that's unrealistic. It's actually not unrealistic at all. That is how cities grow. That is how cities become better. And Limerick is a great example because they actually do this. They've set up a private limited company that strategically buy and develop sites in the public interest. So they have this special purpose vehicle of Limerick City Council to develop these key sites. And there's no reason why that couldn't be emulated here. The only reason it couldn't be emulated here is simply a lack of will. That's just city building. That's how cities grow. Another idea on the same vein of this would be to demolish the Bank of Ireland building on St. Patrick's Street. So it's very narrow at the front and it's quite wide at the back. One of my absolute favourite buildings in the city is on that street as well, and it's St. Peter and Paul's Church. For me, it's Cork's Notre Dame. This building is absolutely incredible, inside and out. During colonial rule, you weren't allowed to build Catholic churches with street frontage, with prominence, but that era is well and truly over, and I would love to see this church as part of a beautiful plaza. Oh my God, I mean, is that even Cork? I got on the 208 in Mayfield and I ended up in Barcelona. The thing with banks, right? I mean, does Bank of Ireland really want to be there? I mean, is it ingrained in that space? It's probably cashless and it would rather be online. like every other bank. They don't want you in there. Sorry, just here to make a lodgement. A lodgement? Oh no, we don't do lodgements. A church like that will never ever be built again. That era is well and truly over. So to accentuate the ones we have by molding the urban fabric around them, I guess the fundamental idea of all of this is that the city moves with fluidity. Spaces can be considered fluid. They change over time, adapting to the city's need. So on to Patrick Street. One step to helping it flourish will be to include some hedges. If we have strategically planted hedges, I'm not talking about robot hedges, just ordinary hedges, low cut, acting as natural dividers. Obviously, hedges take a little bit of maintenance, but so does everything worth having. If it's worth having, it's worth caring for. I think Cheryl Cole said that. Since dinosaurs roamed the earth and up until the mid-1980s, St. Patrick Street was zoned as mixed use. Hotels, cinemas, bars, and restaurants. We've all seen the benefits of outdoor street culture and coffee culture and sitting outside. Let that spill out onto Patrick Street, and allowing a few bars or a few restaurants or a few cafes onto Patrick Street isn't going to inconvenience anyone. I think it only has an upside. If you're on Patrick Street after 6 p.m. when the shops have closed, there's nothing happening, right? So we really want to say that the main street is somewhere that has a nighttime economy. And I'm sure the city have like some kind of nighttime economy officer. This is just practical things that we could do to create more of a nighttime economy. Now, pop quiz hotshot. What street is this? You might be thinking it's Patrick Street, and if you said that, wrong! This is Patrick Street, right? So quite a big difference there. I mean, technically you were right. It is Patrick Street, but it's not actually Patrick Street because this is Patrick Street. And here's what it would look like with some normal lanterns, just normal lights. Again, Patrick Street. Is it Patrick Street? Nope. This is Patrick Street. Some people like them. Those people obviously should have gone to Specsavers. I guess the real problem is that they dominate. They are kind of like urban debris. And when we look at an old picture of Cork, when John F. Kennedy came especially to visit Cork, the buildings shine, the lights are not there. We've had them for over 25 years now, quarter of a century. Corkodians have enjoyed the sensation that there's something unfinished about the city. They're walking under all of this galvanized steel shooting up into the air. The city hired Barcelona architect Beth Gali to design the project. I've actually written a letter to Beth that I'd like to share. Dear Beth, don't come back. So the strange thing is the lights aren't actually so bad because here they are in Barcelona, in Beth's hometown. But what do we notice, right? They're in these wide open areas, wide open, sparingly placed parks, boulevards, beaches. They are not falling over each other like they are on Patrick Street, crisscrossing, cluttering the sky. So I think that the context of the environment in which they're in is really important. And it feels like there was like a 2-for-1 sale on when the city was buying them. And they're like, oh, actually, let's just buy them all. So 25 years on, do we want to stick with these or do we want to change? Personally, I would like a change. It should not cost a lot to fix this problem. First of all, the cheapest fix is that the city just remove half of them. Take them down and then actually it's immeasurably better already. These lights are part of the heritage of the city now. We can reuse them in other areas. Wouldn't they look lovely in Wilton? Or perhaps down the Docklands might be more appropriate where the city's expanding. Or we could sell them and with the money, purchase more appropriate lighting. That's called tapping into the circular economy there. And all in all, they don't need to remove all of them because actually the lights work fine here. But again, they're over the river and over a small park. They're still the wrong color though. So where they do work well, we still don't want them to look like unfinished gray steel shooting out of the ground. It gives the assumption that nobody cared to paint it. So the lighting on McCurtain Street is lovely and it's appropriate. It's perfect. It fits in with Cork's style of buildings. We want to see an urban fabric that doesn't clash with the buildings, but an urban fabric that blends and lends themselves. If the whole city got the care and attention that McCurtain Street got, wouldn't the place be wonderful? On this old photograph of Patrick Street, outside what ended up being Brown Thomas, are these beautiful orbs. It's incredible that we've lost all of the original lighting, but wouldn't it be incredible if we put it back? So what would Patrick Street look like today if we reinstated these orbs? A major thing is the color temperature. So at the moment, the lights on Patrick Street are like incredibly harsh white, whereas in most cities you go to, they're not. And I would love to see more warm, considered lighting. When I showed these softer, more ambient, more European lights, the response was fear. People were worried that they would invite crime, that without the harsh prison yard LEDs, the city might unravel. Other people warned that by painting the poles black, it might cause people to walk into them, despite the poles being black in other cities around Ireland. And what the real tragedy of all of that is that these are the voices that get listened to because they're useful. The objector is a gift. They justify delay, they keep costs down, they preserve the status quo. There is an epidemic of pole clutter in the city. I want to know who is making those poles because they are making a mint from Cork City. This is a newly done junction. This is considered finished, right? So this is the best they could do. We could absolutely consolidate those and everything is still there, but they just don't get a pole each. They share poles. Look at that. Look at the difference that makes. Again, that's just basic urban hygiene. Go out, consolidate the poles and paint them black. It should be so simple. It should be a given. This is a new junction on the South Douglas Road. There's over 35 pieces of unfinished galvanized steel coming up out of the ground there. This is finished. Like, that's the best they could do. Really? That's as good as it gets? No, we couldn't possibly do any better than this. In a functioning city, 2 people in a van could go around and consolidate and remove a few poles per day. Do we need 3 poles for these 3 pieces of information? Or could they be consolidated onto one? Somebody suggested that there's some regulation about the poles. If there is, that needs to be thrown out and torn up. The problem is the city could never have 2 people with a van going out and consolidating these, and then 2 other people, going out painting the poles as well. The reason that could never happen is because that would create a panic, to 2 people going out, using their own judgment, consolidating this stuff. What if someone crashes their car? What if someone sues the city? What if a vortex opens up and swallows Wilton? So the worst case scenario always wins. What we get instead is risk assessments, method statements, legal reviews, interdepartmental sign-offs, public liability evaluations, right? 90% of painting that pole happens in an office. And that's a huge problem. And once you show that a small team can do good work quickly, it begs the question, why do we need so many layers of oversight to get anything done? And for the most part, I don't think it's a question the city wants to answer. And that's why they outsource almost everything. So even public lighting in Cork is contracted out. 14 million euro to Electric Skyline for the first phase of a new lighting strategy. So the city is run by people subcontracting from behind a desk. Now, if something as basic and cheap as painting poles is seen as too much, then I think for me that shows a deep reluctance to care for the city in a meaningful way. And look at the huge difference it has. Like, that's like a different city altogether. Like, that's like I'm walking around somewhere absolutely that somebody really put a lot of thought and care into. When you're walking around the city, start having a look around. There are more poles jutting up out of the ground than there are buildings, than there are trees, than there are bins, than there are everything, They are in their raw galvanized state, presumably because of fear of maintenance. Because if they paint them once, they've made a promise. And from that moment on, they're responsible for keeping them presentable. And look at these, they painted these once 20 years ago, and they're like, oh, actually paint them again? We have to paint them a second time? Oh, that wasn't part of the deal. No, I thought we just paint them when we put them in, and then that's it. That's how little shit the city gives in terms of keeping up appearances. A guy with a paintbrush one afternoon? Nah, impossible. No, So that's where City Hall stalls. Not just on poles though, but on everything that involves ongoing care. But I've got news. Maintaining the city is the job. That's just what cities do. That's kind of their core function. They have to look after the place. That's where the pride comes from. Now, if the systems become so convoluted and so fragile that painting a pole feels like a commitment too far, then what does that say about the city's ability to handle anything bigger? And this is where the issues of scalability comes from. Cork is to be the fastest growing city in Ireland, but if the city can't get these simple things right, then how are we expecting it to scale in a meaningful way? The reaction to my Painting Pana video was very revealing. Conversations with City Hall made one thing clear. You didn't. You will. In a nutshell, the city didn't like the Painting Pana video. Their mindset isn't, how can we do this, or why should we do this? It's why we can't. And that mindset is so totally ingrained. I think that's culturally a real problem for City Hall. When the first thing you reach for is an obstacle, how will anything worth doing ever get done? And that's City Hall in a nutshell, a culture of obstacles. What are the reasons we can't do this? Well, the one that they told me was the equipment. They'd have to rent scaffolding and cherry pickers. And that's actually mostly what I took away from the conversation. How can they not have basic facade maintenance equipment? How do they not have in-house scaffolding for reoccurring jobs? And what does that say about their long-term planning or operational philosophy? Cork City does have a painting grant. I guess it's important to point that out. But it's limited, it's reactive, and largely invisible. A street per year. Oh my God, slow down. Waterford has a painting grant as well, but it stands apart because Waterford City Council treat visual improvement as a civic responsibility because they made it feel like a movement. The approach, wide-reaching, coordinated, and full of energy. The council initiated, invited, promoted, and then followed through. They created clear visibility around the effort, and they got building owners on board and delivered actual change. And that's why the same idea in cities just over 100 kilometers apart lead to radically different results. Now, City Hall probably see this video as a major irritant. Whoops, sorry. Not as an invitation or a contribution to civic dialogue, but as a nuisance. And that should tell us everything we need to know about how public input is valued. They do want engagement, but only on their terms, filtered through consultation portals, boxed into the public participation network. They're losing control of the narrative. Ordinary citizens, without budgets, without departments or mandates, are articulating a clearer vision for the city than the very body tasked with shaping it. One such vision encompasses the streets that intersect Oliver Plunkett Street. They're all about to undergo a massive refurbishment. The impact of the pavement plays a huge part on the character of the street. We can see this in Paul Street, where the warm red gives a distinct feeling of place. Now, Tuckey Street is the most recent street in the city that's been refurbished. It didn't end up looking like that at all, right? It's just these squares without pattern. And it's obviously still a great improvement, but it does emulate the chaotic style of the paving on Grand Parade. The Cole K, with the same palette but better organisation, proves how simple pattern and texture can shape identity. So as Cork rejuvenates more streets, we need distinct paving patterns that add warmth, character, and a sense of continuity. Across Europe, fountains from centuries ago still flow. Texture, light, sound, these are the sensory experiences of a city, and in Cork they're treated as disposable. Cork lost 2 of our fountains in the space of 10 years. There was one outside the Opera House. Where's that fountain gone? Don't know, it's just gone. And then there was one at the end of Shandon Street as well. That fountain dates back from 1886. If somebody came around in the dead of night and cut it down and threw it into the back of a van and drove off, there'd be a criminal investigation. But there never was, because it wasn't stolen by an individual. It was removed by the city. These aren't trivial losses. Fountains, lanterns, they are cultural markers. Part of the issue might have been maintenance, but I mean, really? Really? Was the maintenance so prohibitive that we were better off with nothing? Put a fountain back on Shandon Street, put a fountain back on Emma Place, and we'll call it quits. Simple, elegant fountains, small pump, a bit of plumbing, basic care. So Cork was a city of lanterns. Lanterns outside Father Matthew, lanterns, 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 lanterns. Sorry, I developed a bit of a stutter there, but Cork was a city of lanterns. Where did they all go? Were they just thrown out? Here on Cook Street, we can see two of the last remaining lanterns in the city, but they're not there anymore. They were removed in 2015. Why? Where did they go? Heritage doesn't vanish in one go. It erodes one fountain, one lantern at a time. There's no curiosity about where the fountains and the lanterns actually went. And there's no effort to correct things like the colour of Clontarf Bridge. But that's heritage too, right? Restoring them and putting them back the way they were originally intended. It's Battleship Grey and then like, wow, wow, that could be so nice. Again, just paint. The cheapest thing we could do, just paint. And look at it at night. Ooh, it's like Amsterdam, couples in love, it'll be part of Cork's love story. And it's painted the correct colour, the way it was imagined. That's the conservation I want to see. The city isn't poised to make the most of the unprecedented growth that's coming. The Cork City Development Plan is on paper a strategically sound and occasionally ambitious document, but its vision is really two-dimensional. It outlines how, where, and in what way the city should grow, but there's no representation of vertical layering, no visual thinking around three-dimensional planning. So it divides the city like a spreadsheet, housing here, education here, shops there, but there's no active frontage strategy that creates lively high streets. It talks about compact growth and 15-minute cities, but the zoning maps don't reflect that. It treats the suburbs like dormitories, places where people live and sleep, but it bases everything then on the assumption that they still commute into the city for almost everything. And that's not compact growth. That's pressure on roads, on parking, on traffic. It's pressure on the city centre itself. The Cork City Development Plan reserves tall buildings almost exclusively for the docklands. And even there, the city can't seem to commit. Because just this year, there was a bold regeneration project that was vetoed by Cork City Council and An Bord Pleanála. Oh, yes, goody. An Bord Pleanála. I was wondering how long it would be until they cropped up. Just a little context here. In 2009, the city was championing height. There was plans for the Atlantic Quarter, which was pitched as a transformative anchor for the Docklands. It had political backing, ambition, and imagination. Then the economic crash came and the plans were shelved. Fast forward to today, a private developer brings forward a project of the same scale on the same site. It aligns perfectly with Cork's own development plan, which designates the Docklands as a place for high-density, tall buildings. And what happens? The city votes against it. The same site, same scale, but this time the answer is An Bord Pleanála and Cork City Council rejected it outright. They say it touched on land zoned for education and therefore materially contravenes the development plan. That could have been worked around. Instead, the thing is totally vetoed. They say that it lacks architectural quality and that it's visibly obtrusive. But here's the tallest building in Dublin. I mean, to me, they look pretty much the same, but in actual fact, I think the one in Cork is much nicer because of its colour. It's bright, it's not dark. But An Bord Pleanála thought, yeah, this works in Dublin. This has architectural quality and this isn't visually obtrusive. But in Cork, this lacks architectural quality. This is visually obtrusive. Never mind that the proposal includes creches, a medical centre, a pharmacy, a library, cafes, pubs, restaurants, and community spaces. Don't worry about the fact that it would house 2,000 people on a brownfield site. Look at some of the other stuff that's been built around Cork. Does that have air marks of architectural quality? Is that not visually obtrusive? It's way too subjective. And this really begs a deeper question. It's that Cork doesn't control its own future. The shape of its skyline, its housing stock, its neighbourhoods. Cork operates in this safe space of between kind of like 4 to 10 stories. The more you go up, the more you can come in, the more space you have for public amenities. Developers simply want bang for buck out of the sites they buy. And in beautiful cities that have embraced tall buildings, we can see there's so much more public space. There's so many more parks. There's riverside greenways and promenades and boardwalks. Because actually tall buildings look quite nice. When we go to other cities and we see tall residential buildings, they're not a visual eyesore by any stretch of the imagination. And what you get back in terms of quality public space around them, Tivoli is going to be one of the largest neighbourhoods in Cork. It has the potential to be this first neighborhoods in Cork that embraces tall living. And the more you do that, the more space you have all around these buildings. But if we don't embrace that, then this is what it's going to end up looking like. The more area developers take vertically, the less they have to take at ground level. We're not going to get the same quality of that unless we embrace tall buildings. I made the mock-up of Tivoli there, but I can actually show you the real one. This is the plan for Tivoli. Perhaps they're working within the assumption that they can't go up. So much is needed before Cork can truly embrace itself. City Hall must undergo a cultural shift, one that prioritizes vision over inertia. The city needs minimum urban design standards, and they also need a design philosophy that brings cohesion to the streets. Hire people who can make connections, cut through barriers, and deliver real change. But none of this is possible until City Hall admit there's a problem. Around the world, cities once plagued by dysfunction have turned themselves around through structural and cultural reform. And Cork has the same potential. But you can't treat a patient who won't admit they're sick. And until the city is willing to ask the uncomfortable questions and confront the culture that holds it back, change is almost impossible. If City Hall can find the humility to diagnose itself, then the city will rise again. Cork flag is red and white, and that's the limestone and the sandstone. This is such a wonderful staple of Cork. And what I would love to do is bring that into our design philosophy, and where better to do it? And that's the railings of the river. They're painted all sorts of color: green, gray, blue, mainly those. But you know what it would be lovely to do is see some harmony brought to the quays, this beautiful purple stone that we have in the buildings, because we don't use sandstone anymore. I mean, there's no new buildings that are using this material. I mean, when you're going around cities around the world, they don't have this. So we're painting objects, we're painting railings this color, and it's telling a story. They painted the railings outside City Hall only a couple of weeks ago. And what did they paint them? Grey. So again, it's trying to move away from grey. You know, there's enough grey in the skies. We really want to embrace a bit of color, and where better to embrace it than by the river? And why not have the color tell a story? It's paying homage to Cork's urban fabric, the fabric of the buildings built from sandstone.